Throughout history, mercenaries have played a pivotal role in the ambitions of imperial powers and opportunistic individuals seeking to expand their influence or secure their position in the world. In the 20th century, post-colonial Africa emerged as a key stage for mercenary activity as newly independent nations grappled with internal conflicts, power struggles, and external interventions. Against this backdrop, Eeben Barlow, a former lieutenant colonel in the South African Defence Force, the SADF, and a highly skilled military strategist, founded Executive Outcomes in 1989. Originally conceived as a private security and advisory company, Executive Outcomes specialized in providing elite covert training to South Africa's special forces and offering security consultancy to multinational corporations and foreign governments. As the demand for specialized military expertise grew in Africa's turbulent post-colonial landscape, Executive Outcomes evolved into one of the most prominent private military companies of its time. Its early years, from 1989 to 1992, saw Executive Outcomes operating as an extension of the apartheid-era war machine, playing a role in South Africa's total onslaught strategy against perceived threats to the regime. Executive Outcomes' expertise wasn't limited to South Africa. It extended its reach to NATO forces and even tackled organized crime in South America. However, shifting circumstances transformed the company into a private military company specializing in direct combat support and military advisory roles. Without a standing army or a stockpile of heavy weaponry, it relied on a carefully curated roster of highly skilled operatives. The company drew its personnel from a trusted pool of approximately 2,000 combat veterans, most of whom were ex-South African Defence Forces or South African Police. According to Eeben Barlow, Executive Outcomes received countless applications from aspiring recruits, but only those with prior experience in the SADF, SAP, the African National Congress Military Wing, the Umkhonto weSizwe were considered. This selective process ensured recruits shared common training standards and combat experience. Executive Outcomes' strict recruitment criteria reinforced a culture of discipline and professionalism. The recruitment policy also emphasized inclusivity in terms of race and religion. Candidates were evaluated solely on their ability to perform the job. Financially, Executive Outcomes provided attractive compensation packages that made the dangerous work worthwhile. The average soldier earned around $3,500 per month, while helicopter pilots and high-ranking commanders could take home $7,500 per month. Over its decade-long existence, Executive Outcomes fulfilled numerous contracts across Africa and beyond. However, its most infamous campaigns were in Angola and Sierra Leone, where the company's military precision, strategic expertise, and ability to decisively influence conflicts earned both acclaim and condemnation. Angola, ravaged by decades of civil war, became the proving ground for Executive Outcomes, propelling the private military company into the global spotlight. The Angolan Civil War, far from being a simple ideological struggle, revolved around Angola's lucrative oil reserves and diamond fields. These resources were essential to the survival of the MPLA government, but equally coveted by UNITA rebels led by Jonas Savimbi. After the Cuban withdrawal in 1989, UNITA seized the opportunity, consolidating its hold over much of Angola's territory and resource wealth, leaving the MPLA government in an increasingly dire situation. Hopes for peace flickered briefly in 1991 with an agreement between the MPLA and UNITA, but the September 1992 elections proved to be a breaking point. When early results indicated an MPLA victory, Savimbi rejected the outcome and reignited the conflict. By 1993, UNITA controlled 80% of Angola's countryside, including vital oil-rich regions like Soyo. This was a devastating blow to the MPLA, which relied on oil revenues for its survival. The loss also sent shockwaves through the international oil industry, threatening millions in investments. With its back against the war, the MPLA turned to an unorthodox solution, hiring mercenaries. Anthony Buckingham, a British oil magnate with significant interests in Angola, proposed bringing in executive outcomes to reclaim Soyo. Of course, executive outcomes accepted the mission. The task seemed straightforward. Retake and secure the oil tanks at Kefekwena and Soyo before recapturing the town itself, which had fallen to UNITA forces. Eeben Barlow, Executive Outcomes founder, and his associates recruited a team of seasoned fighters from elite units like South Africa's 32 Battalion. Despite deploying with only half the requested numbers, the team embarked on what was expected to be a swift operation. However, the battle for Soyo turned into a fierce and protracted engagement. Executive Outcomes operatives, leveraging their superior training and tactical expertise, launched a precise assault that successfully drove UNITA forces out of the town. Holding on to Soyo, however, proved a far greater challenge. UNITA rebels counterattacked with relentless determination, forcing Executive Outcomes into grueling defensive battles. Despite suffering casualties, including the loss of 3 operatives, Executive Outcomes maintained control of the town long enough to hand it back to the Angolan military. Sadly, the poorly trained and ill-equipped government forces lost Soyo to UNITA within weeks. The Soyo operation cemented Executive Outcomes' reputation and convinced the MPLA government to grant the company a broader role in the conflict. In mid-1993, as UNITA advanced toward the capital, Luanda, Executive Outcomes secured a lucrative contract worth $20 million annually with an additional $20 million for equipment. For this operation, Executive Outcomes assembled a highly skilled team of operatives drawing from South Africa's reconnaissance regiments, as well as the 32 Battalion and the Parachute Battalion, as well as the Umkhonto weSizwe, the ANC's military wing. Many of these recruits had been discharged during South Africa's military downsizing, bringing with them years of combat experience in counterinsurgency and unconventional warfare. Executive Outcomes operatives in Angola were not just soldiers but also trainers and strategists capable of transforming a struggling army into a functional force. The company's first major initiative was to rebuild the Angolan armed forces, starting with the 16th Brigade, which had been decimated during earlier conflicts. At the longer training base near Luanda, Executive Outcomes personnel taught the MPLA's troops a wide range of skills, from motorized infantry tactics and artillery operations to sabotage, reconnaissance, and medical support. The results were immediate and transformative. Units trained by Executive Outcomes launched successful offensives, reclaiming diamond-rich territories that had been critical to UNITA's revenue. The newly trained 16th Brigade played a pivotal role in these victories, denying the rebels their financial lifeline and shifting the balance of power in the MPLA's favor. Executive Outcomes' involvement in Angola peaked in 1994, a year marked by decisive victories that crippled UNITA's operations. Working alongside Angolan forces, Executive Outcomes operatives reclaimed the Kanfumfo diamond fields, a crucial financial asset for the MPLA. Later that year, they captured Wambo, UNITA's stronghold and de facto capital. These achievements forced UNITA's Jonas Savimbi to negotiate, leading to the Lusaka Protocol in November 1994. The agreement brought a temporary truce with one key condition: Executive Outcomes withdrawal from Angola. The MPLA, eager to secure peace, announced Executive Outcomes' departure, and by January 1996, most of the company's personnel had returned to South Africa. Some, however, remained in Angola, working for private security firms that supported the government. While the Lusaka Protocol offered a brief respite, peace unraveled in 1998, plunging Angola back into war. The Angolan Civil War only ended in 2002 with the death of Jonas Savimbi, but Executive Outcomes' efforts had laid the groundwork for the MPLA's eventual victory. By 1995, the country of Sierra Leone teetered on the edge of collapse. Years of rampant corruption and mismanagement had hollowed out the state, leaving a fragile shell of governance. Former President Siaka Stevens, who had retired in 1985, departed with an estimated $500 million fortune amassed through the exploitation of the nation's diamond wealth. His successor, Joseph Momo, fared no better. Under his leadership, public institutions crumbled, civil servants went unpaid, and the professional class fled abroad, leaving a vacuum that allowed chaos to flourish. Taking advantage of this breakdown, the Revolutionary United Front, the RUF, a rebel group led by Fode Sanko, emerged as a dominant force. The RUF aimed to seize Sierra Leone's valuable diamond mines, which were crucial to the country's economy. By 1994, they controlled much of the nation's mineral wealth and had begun advancing toward the capital, Freetown. Despite international appeals for help, the world turned a blind eye, leaving Sierra Leone to fend for itself. The country's leadership also suffered from instability. On April 29, 1992, a group of young military officers led by Captain Valentine Stresser staged a coup, forcing Joseph Momo into exile in Guinea. This coup replaced the corrupt administration with Stresser's National Provisional Ruling Council. Unfortunately, Stresser's government proved as ineffective as its predecessor. The National Army, hastily expanded to combat the rebels, grew from 3,000 to 10,000 soldiers. Recruits included prisoners and untrained youths whose loyalty was often dubious. Morale was low, equipment was scarce, and discipline was non-existent. Meanwhile, Valentine Stresser himself succumbed to the trappings of power, indulging in luxury and abandoning the revolutionary ideals that had propelled him to leadership. By mid-1995, the war had devastated Sierra Leone. Over 1.5 million people, nearly a third of the population, had been displaced, and at least 15,000 had died since the conflict began. The economy was in freefall, with inflation soaring to 35% and the gross national product shrinking by at least 10% that year. Roads were impassable, mining operations were paralyzed, and the government hemorrhaged millions of lost revenues. Fode Sanko's RUF exploited the situation, advancing to within 36 kilometers of Freetown by May 1995. Captain Valentine Stresser's first response was to hire Gurkha Security Guards, a private military company led by American mercenary Bob Mackenzie, to train a special forces unit to combat the rebels. However, the initiative ended in failure, leaving the government in a deeper crisis. With few options remaining, Stresser turned to Executive Outcomes, the private military company that had gained fame for its successful operations in Angola. Once again, facilitated by Tony Buckingham, who financed the mission in exchange for diamond mining concessions, Executive Outcomes entered Sierra Leone with a clear mandate: drive the rebels back, secure the diamond mines, and stabilize the capital, Freetown. It was a high-stakes gamble. The mining concessions would only be valuable if Executive Outcomes succeeded in capturing rebel-held territory. Within days of arriving, Executive Outcomes operatives, many of whom had come directly from their campaigns in Angola, cleared the Freetown area of RUF fighters. They quickly began retraining army units, incorporating them into their operations. Employing superior tactics, equipment, and discipline, Executive Outcomes pushed the RUF back 100 kilometers into the jungle, an operation they had anticipated would take 3 months. This momentum continued as Executive Outcomes forces recaptured the Kono diamond mines and overran the Kangari Hills, a key rebel stronghold. During these operations, Executive Outcomes worked closely with the Car Majors, a traditional group of hunters who brought unique skills to the battlefield. The Car Majors' ability to navigate the dense jungle and gather tactical intelligence proved invaluable, and Executive Outcomes supplied them with training, ammunition, and communications equipment. By late 1995, Executive Outcomes-backed forces had regained control of Sierra Leone's vital diamond fields, and reopened key mining operations including the rutile and bauxite mines in the south. The RUF, facing relentless pressure, agreed to negotiate with the government. Captain Valentine Stresser, emboldened by executive outcome successes, announced elections for early 1996. However, in January 1996, he was overthrown in a coup d'etat led by his defense chief Julius Maada Bio. While executive outcomes did not participate in the coup, it was widely believed they preferred Julius Bio's leadership to Stresser's increasingly erratic rule. Under Julius Maada Bio's interim leadership, Sierra Leone held elections and Ahmed Tejan Kaba was elected president. Although the RUF resumed hostilities later that year, executive outcomes alongside the car majors swiftly retaliated, forcing the rebels back into negotiations. In November 1996, a peace accord was signed, with one condition being executive outcomes withdrawal from Sierra Leone. International pressure from the IMF and foreign donors further pushed Ahmed Tejan Kaba to terminate executive outcomes contract. Executive Outcomes completed its mission in Sierra Leone and departed in January 1997, but not without warning the government of the risks of their absence. Unfortunately, their prediction proved tragically accurate. Within 95 days of the firm's withdrawal, the government was toppled in a coup d'etat led by Johnny Koroma, who collaborated with the RUF. Sierra Leone remained mired in conflict until 2000. Executive Outcomes campaign in Sierra Leone showcased the company's ability to decisively shift the dynamics of a conflict, but it also highlighted the limitations of relying on private military companies to achieve lasting peace. Executive Outcomes, despite its successes in conflicts such as those in Angola and Sierra Leone, struggled to overcome its image as a mercenary organization. The company faced increasing scrutiny and opposition, which culminated in significant legal challenges that ultimately led to its closure. The decision marked the end of a controversial chapter in private military history, but did not signify the end of the model Executive Outcomes had pioneered. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.